다 간다 란동 된다 됐다 된도랑 타비랑 안에 사제 공부도 란송들 된도고 서버도 말베 안에 된을 하다미 된도 도와도 봐요바이나 안에 된도랑 제부 중앙 중도 뭐 나잖아 봐 안에 동에 다녀 못 보면 타바도 봐요바이나 되는 링글랑 타바송 안에 제부 사제한테 봐요바이나 안에 녀모버듯이 디바마로 봄비 가서 본예게 되는 장주가 생다 신들어서 티바치밀랑 로장고스 what 송들레도 서바.
So again we are looking at Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment. Looking at the root text, Atisha's lamp for the path to enlightenment, we find an early stanza that states, understand that there are persons of three capacities, small, middling, and great. I shall write clearly identifying their characteristics. So in this first stanza, Lord Atisha was referring to the three different pathways, those pathways which lead to the higher realms, those pathways which lead to nirvana or liberation, and those pathways which lead to complete Buddhahood. Buddha taught those who desired or wished for rebirth in the higher realms, the teachings or the pathways that are shared in common with beings of small capacity. So these pathways lead to the higher realms of cyclic existence. For those who wish or want to have complete liberation or nirvana for themselves, the Buddha taught that the teachings shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and taught the teachings that would show how one would get rid of the afflictive obstructions and allow one to achieve liberation by relying on the practice of the three higher trainings, or the three higher trainings. And then the Buddha, so these were the pathways shared in common with beings of medium capacity. And then, for those beings that wish to be free completely from all of the afflictions and their imprints, so not only the afflictive obstructions, but also the obstructions to omniscience, the Buddha taught the pathways for beings of great capacity were explained for those types of people, and those practices were for beings to achieve the Buddhahood, and those beings do so by relying upon the pathways of bodhicitta and engaging in the six perfections and so forth. So these three capacities are referring to the three specific pathways. Capacities practitioners who wish for the results of these specific pathways. So the results are the higher realms nirvana and complete Buddhahood, and those correspond with the pathways shared in common with beings of small capacity that lead to higher realms, the pathways shared in common with beings of medium capacity that lead to liberation, and then the pathways for beings of great capacity that lead to Buddhahood.
다 데리 내가 도와줘 봐요. 이난 중고다 라지 볼로장 거래. 로장한테 아니 본조선라 저선도 요구네. 너게 조금 수리 간도 줘도 손마도나 안 대발샤나 지기나 살리지 그래. 말지 어때 용도 거서 말봐.
So for those who have a desire for or wish to have rebirth in the higher realms of cyclic existence, there are pathways which lead to that state. So these are the pathways that are shared in common with beings of small capacity, and those practices include going for refuge to the three jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, engaging in ethical behavior which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, and acknowledging one's downfalls if he or she has engaged in a negativity.
어제 다들 어디 사지 마디고 뒤라르고 사지 놀을다 해볼래 좀들 좀 총도 좀 라지를 벌로 좀 수단 딩다 좀 라지를 벌로 좀 제비심이 라지를 벌로 좀송 제비 총을 라지를 벌로 좀 수들라 나 삼바장 모두 삼바도 제비체 들라로도 세워 송제 삼바장 모두라 지된 심마도니 줄로 집어다 지된 심마도 더 되버니 When you non Tanjin Shamadi taught them with the lead Marba, what the la, John to the landing in the lady what the not what the lead Marba.
So if we look at the outline of Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, and we find that there is an outline that deals with these different capacities. The capacities are training the mind in stages shared in common with beings of small capacity, and looking at the outline, and then the category of training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and then training the mind in the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. So under that first heading, training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, we find three categories that go under that major heading. The first category is developing the state of mind of a person of small capacity. So the development of that mental state, or the training the mind in that type of state of mind. So this is the first category. The second category is the measure of that development of the state of mind of a person of small capacity. And then the last category, dispelling any misconceptions about a person of small capacity. So those are the three categories. Under that first category of developing that state of mind of a person of small capacity, or the actual training of thought, if in the book I think it says the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, we find two categories. First, developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and then relying on a means of achieving happiness in one's future life. So developing the state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, we finished, and now we're on relying on the means for achieving happiness in one's next life. So then this is where we arrive at the two topics of refuge and then karma and its results. So this is the general outline that we've gone through previously in the great treatise. So the actual training of thought for a person of small capacity, and now we're doing the relying on the means for achieving happiness in the next life, and that begins with the refuge and karma and its results.
What? Tanjini Shamadi thought about the lot of the John to the lady in the John to Katumara, John to the Laje, Conlat and the Joseph Joe. 教书从语，这趟教书去教书从呢，老不着，啥这些嘛的吧？一个到了，教书的就是从教书的语，他这趟教书从去的了，去看到的了，去的了，原先西北国的教书，原先西北国的教书的话，700西北国的教书的话，我都能开心多，这个哪呢？ And
so this first section, training and going for refuge, the excellent gateway or entrance into the instruction or into the teaching, begins with 4 points that are made. First, the causes for going for refuge. Second, based on that, the objects to which you go for refuge. Third, the way you go for refuge, or the explanation of refuge. And fourth, the precepts or advices for going for refuge, or once you've gone for refuge, the precepts, or once you've gone for refuge, the advices that are given. So we've gone through the first two, causes of going for refuge, and based on that, the objects to which you go for refuge for. So now we're on the way you go for refuge, or the explanation of refuge. So there are 4 categories. So the explanation of refuge by knowing the good qualities, explanation of refuge by knowing the distinctions, explanation or going for refuge by way of commitment or through commitment, and then fourth, by refusing to acknowledge outsiders or other acknowledge other refuges, outsiders' refuge. So these are the 4 categories differences, distinctions is the point where we are now in that second point. So we've already gone through by knowing the excellent qualities or good qualities under the way you go for refuge, or the explanation of going for refuge. And so explaining it by way of knowing the excellent qualities is complete. Explaining it by knowing the distinctions is where we currently are. So we'll begin in the section. In the English, the distinctions begin on page 188.
다 주주연대 시부군 저선도와데 다 두두지나 두바굴론 나지 말베 출 두발레 가자 두발레 출라 지바 말베 출 지바 추지 고게라 줘봐 추지 줘봐 추지 다부 줘봐 출레 쇼아 추지 쉬 출라 또봐 추지 투바서 어떻게 노전 나진지 나리 좀 그런 데 되는도와 어떻게 해도와 다 근데 주에 시부근 저선 도와들라 근데 뒤바고 노지다네 뒤발에 근데는 최마와 최셔바 최sem바 최지신 최zem바 최라zem바 최라쳐바 최지 샤와셔바 최지셔와 최셔바 평송소바 라진지 타와 라진지 타바 니지 추진 니지 당된바 다도 엠비쇼와 다도 출라요와 다도 가보 셔냐바 오도 디바들 되되된도와 추 오들 시스와 다가도 제단은 다가 주말 줄라말에 추근주고 세니에데 ane gane kunjule yete jeden oto sukunga ngazo rus sinsabar oto nga tenda oto jibe ta chaba shibugune jasuno gato oto ledi bare.
Okay. So we previously went over the first point that deals with the excellent qualities. So the explanation of going for refuge, or the way you go for refuge, by knowing the excellent qualities, first dealt with the Buddha's excellent qualities. So the excellent qualities of Buddha's body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities. So we completed that. The next, we dealt with the excellent qualities of the teaching, or of the Dharma jewel. So in this, if we were to summarize the meaning of that, we would read this quote from the compendium of the teachings. So it says, these Buddha... Okay, we're going to do it like this. So all these Buddha Bhagavans possess limitless excellent qualities. These excellent qualities are born from the teaching, are divided by the teaching. If you're following along in English, I'm just changing it a little bit to match up the previous explanation Rinpoche gave. That's on page 187, where we find the good qualities of the Dharma. Our Gukela La Jupa are divided by the teaching. Our emanations of the teaching are always... hold on 1 second. Yeah. So Rinpoche is saying to read the English. His book is fine. So they're divided by the teaching. They depend on the teaching, and the teaching they are established by the teaching. There's a couple that are missing. So they are governed by the teaching. So let me reread it. So all of these arise from the teaching, are divided by the teaching, are emanations of the teaching, are governed by the teaching, are born from the teaching, are objects of the practice of the teaching, rely on the teaching, and are established by the teaching. And this is what is said. This is what has been stated. That's literal, and then if we just read this, these Bhagavan Buddhas possess infinite and limitless good qualities. Such qualities are born from the teaching, from the proper practice of the teaching. The teaching creates and governs them. They arise from the teaching, are within the scope of the teaching. They depend upon the teaching, and the teaching produces them. Only reason I gave an alternative translation is to match Baso Chuji Jetsun's commentary we previously did for those who are following along. The next section, we deal with the good qualities of the community. I'm going to choose to translate this every time I remember as those who aspire to virtue. And it's going to become extremely important in Rinpoche's explanation he gave last week of the results that qualify the Sangha. The literal translation of Sangha in Tibetan, if you look at the Tibetan, is those who aspire to virtue. So it says, chief among members of the community. Sometimes, though, community is appropriate if it says tsok, the assemblage. But when we're saying it as far as the jewel, Gendun, it's those who aspire to virtue. So I'm just going to be using that, and you'll see why it becomes important in a moment. Chief among the members of the community are those persons who are noble beings. Okay, so if we were to summarize the good qualities of the community, or the Sangha jewel, or those who aspire to virtue, we say, think those who aspire to virtue teach the teaching, practice it, reflect on it. It is the teaching's field. It upholds the teaching, entrusts itself to the teaching, worships the teaching, and conducts itself according to the teaching. It has the teaching as its sphere of activity and is the best practitioner, the most excellent practitioner of the teaching. It is naturally honest and pure and endowed with the quality of compassion and has great compassion. It always has solitude as its field of activity and is always absorbed in the teachings and always practices virtue. So this is how we find a brief summary in the Lamrim Chenmo, according to the compendium of the teachings, Sangha, the compendium of teachings, a Sangha's text as to what we could summarize the Sangha jewel as. And going back to the the Sublime Continuum, we found that we had the 8 qualities of the Buddha, 8 qualities of the Dharma, 8 qualities of the Sangha that we previously went over, 8 excellent qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, each having 8 excellent qualities. We've already gone over that, so we're going to just move on now to going for refuge by knowing the distinctions, which is the next section after the excellent qualities.
Nipa cheba shibigun chosun ruwa, cheba shibigun chosun ruwa, Lamrim Chenmo ten ruwa, Lamrim Chenmo jadang yuju shijil ruwa, inchi kasu, inchi kasu.
We're on page 188 now in the English.
Da cheba shibigun chosun ruwa, nga zuwa dani wadan mendo shana mara. Cheba shibi chosun suwa nes, Doa Nenjuan Tar, Kunju Sun Na Pensunji, Chabashine, Josun Rua was, Chabashibugun Josun Rua de, and the Saga Doa Pechin, Doa Nenjuan Tar, Kunju Sun Na Pensuki Chaba, Sanji Kunjutan, Chu Kunjutan, Ganu Kunjutan Pensuki, Chabashibugune, Josun Rua de, Chabashibugun Josun Rua, what the cigarettes. 당아서 된 천이 저번에 이나는 사지 군주다 근육 군주를 쳐가지고 와래 마송이 뭐지 대화이 되지 아니 추군주다 사지 군주를 쳐가지고 근육 군주다 아니 추군주를 쳐가지고 왔던데 쳐바시고는 저선으로 왔던데 다시 다는 디사로 다는 마 쳐바시고는 저선으로 그런데 보자 나진 제들 어디 사지 조용도 쳐바시고는 저서 송안에서 도와는 중앙다를 건조수 나변주 쳐바시네 저선으로 늘라 졸레스 쳐바시고는 저선으로 사지 조도 주 천일 주비 쳐봐 천일 주비 쳐봐 트레지 쳐봐 메비 쳐봐 루비 쳐봐 제수 루비 쳐봐 소나피 쳐봐스 저수 송이 라버샤이 렘바스 어디 드니바들레네 말에 어디 쳐바시고는 저선으로 천이 쳐바시고는 저선으로 트레지 쳐바시고는 저선으로 메비 쳐바시고는 저선으로 루비 쳐바시고는 저선으로 제수 루비 쳐버려 저선으로 소나피 쳐버려 어디 조디 말에 다 담보 ana tambu terendwa ndala troles chaba shibugun jozruwa troje chenil jubi chaba tele chaba la so tro nan tambu de chenil jubi chaba ne sanje gonju ne ngaba zuba janju bi seni hilas chu gonju ne di ndebo ta gene gonju ne jeje menga ki ya taba jubi seni dos o de chenil chaba shibu chenil jubi chaba de terendwa 다 사지 건조성에 간에 지자고래 주 건조도 간에 자고래 견디 건조도 간에 자고래서나 다 도문네 뭐바 주버 상주비 세니라스 사지 건조성에 뭐바 주버 상주비 세니 사지 건조도 뭐바 주버 상주비 세니 뭐바세 le sheba le kwa le toba watan jilse de marba ngoba ngatu meshe ge zo tonala zo ngoba se la go jirota sanje ge chö tanje ngoba res chö tanje chen chö tanje ane chö tanje chen go re sanje ma chen bi chö yo mares ne ngoba zoba sanje ma sheba jiwe na ngoba ma zoba ro sanje ma shebi chö me zan ngoba zoba res ngoba 당하고 sees also at marba sanjege also all sees at dabju ko munde ngobar zoba shanchu bi senye shanchu sondu shanchu la nyete shanchu raje shanchu tejeng shanchu songyong ro song nane ane sanjege shanchu de teba chembi shanchu shanchen de marba ngobar zoba shanchu bi sen sanje sengende ngobar zoba chön kunzi yende güde and ngoba zuba shanchu ba odnjila and sanje sagres sanje sagan dnjil chagures
Rinpoche the ngechua the NGK yabuzugo the ngompa zobar the tsigni ngompa hlapa tama
hlapa sena tonga I saw season Buddha see so Buddha see all dhamma Buddha see all also all dhamma se lagu marbe
yeah full
ngobar zoba chö tanje zoba chengo re chö du tanje zoba go re ma shebe ji yo mas ngobar zoba so tin zaman
okay
shanchu se teba jem shanchu
okay so we begin, it says here, according to the going for refuge by knowing the distinctions. According to the Dependium of Determinations, you go for refuge after understanding the distinctions among the three jewels. So in the Lamrim Chenmo, here it says there are, then it says that, and then in the Tibetan it says there are six points. And then Rinpoche stated the 6 points are they are all distinctions, and these six are the distinction based on the defining characteristics, the distinction based on enlightened activities, the distinction based on devotion, the distinction based on practice, the distinction based on recollection, and the distinction based on how they increase merit or accumulate, increase merit. So it begins with the distinction, based on their defining characteristics. So if we were to look at this word distinction or difference, and we were to look at it in terms of debate or a dialectical way, if we were to look at it in terms of debate, or Tseni, I think, can also just be translated as philosophy. Or, if we were looking at it in terms of philosophy, we would say, we would compare the differences by means of the four permutations, three permutations, mutually exclusive or synonymous. So we would say, what is the difference between the Buddha jewel and the Sangha jewel? Is it three permutations, four permutations, mutually exclusive, or synonymous, or mutually inclusive? The next would be, what is the difference between the Dharma jewel and the Buddha jewel? Is it three? Is it four permutations? Is it mutually exclusive or synonymous or mutually inclusive? What is the difference between the Sangha jewel and the Dharma jewel? 3, 4, mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive or synonymous. So if we were to look at it in terms of philosophy or debate, we would look at it in terms of those. That's how we would know the distinctions. But we can also know the distinctions by looking at it in these terms. So if we were looking at it in terms of debate, we would do it that way. And now we're going to look at it in terms presented here based on 6 different distinctions. So we begin with the distinction based on defining characteristics. So it says the Buddha jewel has the defining characteristic of full, perfect enlightenment. So this idea of full, perfect enlightenment is this full is almost this completion. I asked if the word highest, but it's more of a there isn't anything out of reach, so there's a completion. And meaning anything out of reach is a loose translation, but Rinpoche spoke of just seeing a form is able to just be seen. The Buddha is able to see all phenomena simultaneously. The Buddha doesn't have an object of comprehension or an object of knowledge that can't be seen. So this is a fully developed individual. So this fully and perfect is this fully developed enlightenment. And this word enlightenment then, this fully developed or this full perfect enlightenment is the Shanchen, the highest enlightenment, the greatest enlightenment. This greatest enlightenment is this full or perfect makes it a greatest enlightenment because when we look at the term enlightenment, we can categorize it 3 ways. Hearer's enlightenment, solitary realizer's enlightenment, and the Buddha's enlightenment. So the Buddha's enlightenment has this characteristic which qualifies it as a Buddha's enlightenment is that it is full and perfect. It is complete. It is fully developed. So this is the Buddha's enlightenment, and there is no object of comprehension that he or she cannot see. So this is the meaning of that. So we would look at it and debate in those terms, and then we begin with the Buddha jewel and the distinction here. Did I miss something?
ane yeshu chugu to ngonye gu to jan de gro ode saje de karja gu na ane longu to chugu ane chugu de zogo de liores ane saje ki cheni saje ki danda do de jil sagres. What is the meaning of Buddha?
Less so.
What is Buddha Damas? Buddha get done
less so.
Damage, and again you get what the shade woman. Cheni the automatic lady.
Rinpoche Tambo, the Sanjay, the Gari Chuku, Lunku Chuku, Gari
Sanjay in the Gazi.
Ni Sonje.
Mobia.
Okay. So then when we begin, so we say, what is the Buddha? We can see that there's different ways to divide the Buddha. The Buddha by the truth body, form body. We can divide the Buddha by the nature body, exalted wisdom body, which are the 2 of the truth body, and the enjoyment body and the emanation body, or the truth body and the enjoyment body, emanation body. So we can divide the Buddha in those. This is when we say, what is the Buddha? Those are all examples of what the Buddha are. The truth body, enjoyment body, emanation body. So then we then say, what is the meaning of these things that we're speaking of, these objects of our refuge? What do they mean? What is the meaning of the Buddha? What is the meaning of the Dharma? What is the meaning of those who aspire to virtue, or the Sangha? What is the meaning of this? So this is where these distinctions and so forth are necessary, so that we know what this is.
Sanji Gunju Debbie is Laworo, Marba. That true Gunju Nangazo, and then go papi demo, then la papi demo was. Go there the la then you must choke on yes and Omaris, go papi demo down. You move but the she deba, can on pumping go there down, and the Teponje Palang, Nietu Palang, Rajak Palang, Shatu Semi Palang, and the Sanji Papi Lang, what to Golo, and then choke on Judas. And then Papi Juji, and then Joe on pumping go there the le, and then go there the le, choke on Julagre, choke on go there the Ladeni was. Choke on to the go there the Ladeni, Nima the Jens and Omaris, choke on you. That choke on to Sanji Conju, Deborah, some of you, telling us in the shape of Jadamadu,
That's so. So the next point, it says, after that is the teaching, the Dharma is a result of that. So the Dharma jewel is a result of that. So meaning that the Dharma jewel is a result of the Buddha jewel. So it says the Dharma jewel is a result of that. So and that in the Tibetan is referring to the Buddha jewel. So here we went over this many times, this point that's made here. And here, when we look at what the Dharma jewel actually is, it's referring to the true paths and true cessations within the continuums of superiors. Those superior hearers, those superior solitary realizers, those superior bodhisattvas, and those superior Buddhas. So the true paths and those cessations and abandonments within those continuums of those beings are what the Dharma jewel is referring to. And so those are necessarily superior paths and superior cessations. And when we look in terms of the pathway, the Four Noble Truths, we find the truth of the two cause and effect relationships, and we find between the truth of suffering and origin, showing how one is bound to cyclic existence, and truth of cessation and path, and then one depends upon the path in order to achieve the cessation of suffering. So the achievement of cessation in the great vehicle would be the removal of the obstructions, afflictive obstructions, which are obstructions to liberation, and the obstructions to omniscience, or literally the obstructions to all objects of awareness. So these are removed by reliance upon a path. So when we're speaking of Dharma, those in its gross sense, in this the main sense, we're speaking of the paths and cessations within the continuum of those four different divisions of superiors I mentioned.
Sanji Papa Otuzula, Genukunjula Kaza Imchandras, Chukunjula Kaza Maim Chaldras.
So the Dharma, the Yanjusurama.
Genukunju in the Kaza would be.
The Tambo the Gari Sumpra, the Chugunchu, the Papa Lang, Papi Ju Lang,
Papi Ju Lang, Chukunju.
Then again doing Kansa Ingoa.
Chukunju Julia can.
Okay, Julie, you can go and get me. Okay. So then, when we move to the Sangha jewel, or the jewel of those who aspire to virtue, we're referring to those beings who have achieved the realizations of path and cessation, and those beings who are hearers, solitary realizers, bodhisattvas, and Buddhas. So we're specifically, when we're speaking of those who aspire to virtue jewel, the Sangha jewel, it refers that there's necessarily a being, a person there. And that person has to have achieved those superior paths within his or her continuum, which then makes him or her a superior or an Arya. So it's any being of the hearer, solitary realizer, bodhisattva, or Buddha, any of those beings. Here are solitary realizers, bodhisattvas or Buddhas that have achieved the superior state, are the spiritual community jewel, or those who aspire to virtue. That's so. So, in looking at this the mantra in the Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge, it says Teata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhi Soha. We're all presented. So the first gate is referring to the path of accumulation. The second gate is referring to the path of preparation. These are all ordinary beings' paths. These are non-superior paths. When you get to paragate, this is referring to the path of seeing. So it's at paragate where we begin to find the Dharma jewel and the jewel that from those who aspire to virtue, or those who aspire to virtue jewel. So it's that path of seeing at paragate, and then parasamgate, meditation, bodhisoha, no more learning. Those beings who have achieved that, it begins at that paragate state, which is at the path of seeing. So the path of seeing within the continuum itself is referring to the Dharma jewel, where we're finding these true paths and cessations, and the person experiencing it is now one who aspires to virtue. Beginning at that part. Decent.
That's how you go to the Nova Zuba. Less so. And the Saji Conju, the Jungus, and the Saji Conju Kasure, and the Kanta Samba da Pala and Gonson to Zine, and the Colotombo, Colopapa, Donga, Chukumabuku, Chuju Colomabuku, Chuju Colomabuku, Latene, and the Temen, Jebu Chungoda, Din Da. Jebu Chembusogene, and the Chukunju the Lujonje was Marbe, Kanju to the Lujonje was Kanju to the Lujonje, Jebu Chungu Lata, Dingle Lata, or to Lujonje, Mengaki. Gendune, Jeji Mengaki. Genukunju ne, Jeji Mengaki, Yataba Drup sending to us. Genukunju the Jeji Mengata, Kanju to the Sonji Chuku Sadu and the Kayoro, Dotanga. What the Solution Jene, Teneri Medime, and the Tolan, the Julan Tolan, Golan, what was Jules Jibashi was, what things are Marbe, Tobashi Bisseni. Tapasu Chiji, what the Chuju was, and Anagasu Noduji with the Kantaya that they were told Nabakudan Hasun de Sumbas, Nabakudan Hasun de Sumbas, Nasusana, and the Trandan teaching the Temega, Dun Hatsuba, Sumbaris, Su Sumbarisana, then Saji Papi Sumbaris, Talk Latin Sumbarisana, Talk Nanchin Latin Sumbaris, what the Tatan Dabajavan of the Basu Chuji. Chuju Kolukuasana. And the Saji Rebrota. Chukunju, the Saji Rebe is not the Tubadu. The way Himbata, Maimba Mamajaku.
Less so. Okay. So then it says the community has the defining characteristic of correct practice by means of personal instruction, or giving the instructions. So those who are aspiring to virtue engage in the practices of the path of accumulation, path of preparation, and so forth. And then after achieving these realizations, then give the personal instructions. So here we're speaking of turning the wheel of the Dharma. And if we look at it in the Buddhist sense, the teachings were given, and then in dependence upon the scriptural turning, just in dependence upon the turning of the wheel of Dharma, then the small, medium, and great scopes are explained, and so forth. So the Dharma, the explanation of the Dharma, the turning of the wheel of Dharma, depends upon the Buddha. So in Basu Chuji Jetsun's commentary, he says that this is what is meant by this. The Dharma arises from the Buddha because the turning of the wheel of Dharma, the explanation of the small, medium, and great scopes come from this Buddha. And we look at the pronouncements, the Kangjur pronouncements being the example of the turning of the wheel of Dharma, where all of this is explained and represented. So Basu Chuji Jetsun says the definitive and interpretive teachings and the Hinayana and the Mahayana teachings, the skillful means behind these instructions that the Buddha does because of traversing these various pathways are what is meant by this, that the Dharma comes from it. So Rinpoche said, we can say that the turning of the Dharma comes from the Buddha, but the Dharma coming from the Buddha has some issues that we've already addressed. So we've gone over the issues of stating that the Dharma comes from the Buddha. So if we add this, the turning of the wheel of the Dharma comes from the Buddha, then it starts to not seem like there's a conflict. But we have to look at it and interpret it, and that's Basu Chuji Jetsun's interpretation. And I just want to make sure that I got everything. So the community practices it and then gives these personal instructions. So those who aspire to virtue, and then gives the personal instructions that they have learned and realized. And just as a note, as an aside, we're realized because it begins at that path of seeing that they become Sangha, that they become those who aspire to virtue. So that's it. Decent. Less so. Less so. Yin.
Waddle Tobando,
less so.
Yana rebels again there, Sanji Chukuku, Telatene, and Chebu Chung the Drain, the Solution Jene, and the Chukun to Toba Yungoro, and you can to Toba Yungorba. Can you go to Toba Yungoro?
Achieve again. Gendun going to achieve Gendun, okay.
When you go to Talangune. And the children of Julius is not going to go less so. The Rebbe Hotel, Sanji Latin Druba. Sanji Latin Druba is a teen rebels make it out with Yenamana. Rebel Teni Vajana and Chukun to London Janamatu Kabua.
Less so. So,
and the Sanji Taba Imataba is a Losuna.
Taba.
Sanji Taba is very low.
Less so.
Sanji Taba is. Sanji on the Mataba was not go soon to Chile. What does Mataba love?
Less so.
Good, the Sungu, the Tuju, the Chile, the Otuzu, Mataba. Ah. That Chetan Sanji Tabar is good head, Menebian de Euro, Menebian de Munico, Tabar is. Sanji Taba is a local kind of Yure. Sanji Taba is a lot, Sanji the and the Jews and the Kabdoda. Tabarwada, Jew, Migdabai. Chukun to the Sanjin Drebin is Sanjil Twin Druba Yinzang, the Drebs Migdabai. Then go Papi Dembo, then the Lampapi Dembo was called Junini Laura. Landella Tune, go down to Druba Yinzang, Landette, and go down treasure, go down to Landeng, train Drebres. What the Najana can do? What
So we see this statement that says that the Dharma arises from that. So the Dharma arises from the Buddha jewel. If we look at what the Dharma refers to the truth of the true paths and cessations within the continuums of the superiors. So when we look at those two divisions, we find one that's permanent, cessations, and one that's impermanent, true paths. And if we were then to say, based on that, is the Dharma permanent or impermanent? The Dharma is permanent. So the Dharma is permanent. Then, if something's permanent, it can't be a result. It can't. It's not possible for it to be a result. It has to be impermanent for it to be a result. So this question arises. So then we have to interpret the meaning of this. We can say, in dependence upon the Buddha's turning of the wheel of Dharma, turning of the wheel of the Dharma, of the teaching shared in common of beings of small capacity, the teaching shared in common with beings of medium capacity, the teachings for beings of great capacity, there is the achievement of the realization within the continuums of beings of the true paths and true cessations that then allow those beings to achieve the state of those who aspire to virtue. So we can say that in dependence upon the Buddha's turning of the wheel of doctrine, that the Dharma is created because it's in dependence upon this teaching that the practitioners listen and then achieve the Dharma within their continuums. But we can only say that it's nominally designated in this case as a result. Because when we look at it at its main point, the Dharma is permanent. Now, if we look at other topics, such as the Buddha is permanent. But if we look at the excellent qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities, we would say that these are impermanent. So we have to look at all of these points and then see where our doubts bring us. To see, doubt and look and start to try to understand what is being really meant here by way of commentaries and so forth.
And then go back on the Sheba and how Gumbalish Chule Chebas, Dubagno Dama.
Lessa.
The Kato de Sanji and Zukalo, Chukunjul Jevares, Gana Gumbata, Gubang the Shebal Chelas one. Cheba Sheba Kato de Chukunjul Sanji Devi Shati to Gonga and Devi, Gonga Shati Devi, Lakin Dabere.
Lessa.
In our Lokaj Majana.
So we begin to have a doubt because in the Dharma section we find that it states that the excellent qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities, those immeasurables, excellent qualities, are arisen from the Dharma. So in this section in here, we find that it, when it gets into this point, I'm going to read it from the Tibetan. It says the scriptural and realizational dharmas, cessations and paths, are dependent upon, are arisen from the Dharma. So arisen from this proper inspection of the Dharma or investigation of the Dharma. So all of these excellent qualities, it says, once you realize these excellent limitless qualities of the Buddhas arise from the Dharma, basically are arisen from the Dharma, in short. But then we find another point here that says that the Dharma is a result of the Buddha. So we have to just analyze these, the meanings behind these, because in one sense it speaks of it in one way, and in the other sense it speaks of it in another way. So we have to find out, it says that such qualities are born from the teaching. So the such qualities here are speaking about the excellent qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities. So these qualities are born from the teaching. And then later on right here it says it's a result of the Buddha. So these are two differing ideas, and we have to look at them. Okay, so we'll take a short break, and we'll come back to this. Less so. Less so. Okay. So we're going to begin now looking at the words cause and effect and so forth. So we begin with the word cause. The word caused is defined as a producer. The word effect is defined as produced, that which is produced, or something, that which is produced, I've translated as. So this is how we define cause and effect. Cause, effect, and functioning thing are all synonymous, mutually inclusive. So with the functioning thing, cause and effect are synonymous. Cause and effect, ngopo ju danjepo donchi. Okay, so, and then the cause and effect are synonymous, or mutually inclusive. So when we say the word cause and effect, those two words are synonymous or mutually inclusive. But if we say this, the cause of this and the effect of that, then that becomes, the cause of this and the effect of this, then that becomes mutually exclusive. So if we use then an example to explain cause and effect, we use a mother and a child. The mother is the cause of the child. So the mother is the producer of the child that is that which is produced. So the mother being the cause, the child being the result. The mother being the producer, the child being that which is produced. So all compounded phenomena share this. We can look at all compounded phenomena, all impermanent phenomena in this way, that when we look at cause and effect, something that which is a cause and an effect. But the cause of this and the effect of this are mutually exclusive. The cause of a tree and the result of this tree, the cause of this tree and the result of this tree are mutually exclusive. But cause and effect are mutually inclusive, without adding on the cause of this and the effect of this. I did all the definitions and the examples. Decent.
What did it done? I don't go back with them on the Lapa with them both. Go there the Ladeni Judy is Lade and go there Judy. Go there the Lade and River, Sonsa you are is Lade and go there Judy La Jumare, go there Tabares, go there Lade and River La Jumare, could Tabar water.
Bless her.
Call you. Junde Migi Tabare Matu, Junde Munemares, what the Nesson was, what the example Yahudu. Then it's true going to Sanjig and Devi in the Mahi do the double.
So when we look at the Four Noble Truths, the two final truths. We say that there is a cause and effect relationship between the truth of path and the truth of cessation. But when we look at this, what the meaning of cause and effect is, we find that cessation is necessarily permanent. So the cessation is permanent, so it can't be a result, because it's permanent, it can't be caused. So it's merely nominally designated as the cause and effect relationship that shows how one is bound to cyclic existence. So it's not a true cause and effect, because cessation's permanent, and permanent is not produced. So then we begin to question, based on that information, is the Dharma jewel arise from the Buddha jewel?
What the Cheba Shibagun Joseph was the Chenrezig Jubi Chabakatula and Saji Gunju and Mobazu Shajubi Chenrezig, Chu Gunju T. Davis Long do, Saji Gunju Vegetaba in Logures, Chenrezig
Sanjay Gonchu.
Saji Gunju no Taba Javedro.
Okay.
Moni good. Tabared.
Less so.
Saji Menemina Tabar.
Permanent.
Saji Gunju Vegetaba in Logures.
That
That Chu Gunju Longo de Landeni, Yuzango de Landeni Tabaro.
Less so.
Chu Gunju Taba in Logos. And the Chu Gunju to Saji Devin the Karu, Saji Tabare de Marwa, and the Chu Gunju Tabare, and the Chu Gunju to Saji Devin Sondula, or to Koa Lukaji, me Tabaris, Lanamato, Devune is Lautu.
Ale Sanjay Chu Gonchu Gijepo Sanjay Tapaya Nika Yim. Okay.
Chu Gunju the debutants, debutants.
Less. Oh, okay.
Sanji Gunju the Mobazu Shanjubi Seni Las, Chu Gunju the debutants, Chu Gunju Sanji Gunju Devin, and Sanji Gunju Tabare, Chu Gunju Tabare, Chu Gunju Sanji Revesina, Migi Tabarajana Matu, Debutsini Mijatu.
Less so. So when we look at the definition of result, and then we look at this line that says the Buddha has the defining characteristics of full perfect enlightenment, the Dharma jewel has the defining characteristics of arising from the Buddha jewel, or literally it is a result of that, then we have to say it's just named as such. Because if we look at the Buddha jewel is permanent. If we look at the Dharma jewel is permanent. So the translator's note, Rinpoche might have said it before, he definitely said it in the last class, in the initial teachings. If there's an instance of a subject that's permanent, it's called permanent. So Rinpoche said the exalted wisdom truth body of the Buddha is the Buddha impermanent, so the Buddha jewel is permanent. Because there's an instance. So just sorry if translator's note. The Buddha jewel is permanent. The Dharma jewel is permanent, but here it says the Dharma jewel is a result of the Buddha jewel when both subjects are permanent, the Buddha jewel and the Dharma jewel. So we have to then look at what this means and realize it's just named as such. It's a nominal designation, and then investigate what it really means, what really is being presented here. So that then some doubts, or doubts may arise, and this doubt. It's not a doubt in a negative way. It's an inquiry or something like this. Something more like that than a doubt. It's a doubt, but it's more like you're inquiring into it because of it.
And the Longo to Turku in Debutan with the Lana and Jundero. Longo Turku Shaja to be Chuchukoloku, and then Teme to Lojonje, and then Teme Chukun to Toro. Teme Chukun to Toro, near to the Rajaki Chukun to Toro. Near to the Raja Chukun to there, and then Turku Chukuko Latin to Wayin.
Less so.
Chemeg Chuku Taba Inaya, Sanjik Chuku, La Tuna Truba Yinza, the Rebus Ming Towers. Goden the Landela then Juba Yinza, Goden the Landen Debus make Dagaduas, then double as a lot of Madaja Kabamudu.
So
the two Sanjin did not watches. Sanjil Chuku Latin and Netudan Rajetus, Netudan Rajetus, Sanjil Chumbares, Sanjil Chevares, Candes Chevarasana, Sanjil Chukuluku, and then Kuruzulujan Jene, and then Netu Babatan, Raja Baba, to two Sonres. The Sanjil Debris. Netu Sanjil did not watches. Netu the Sanjil Dis and the Kazaro. And the Tomas and Kazarova. The intervention of the Rigo, Netu Sanjin did not watch. And the Tuan the college Eversana, Sanjit the Shanchu Sambal Trumares, Shanchu Sambal Trumares, that Shanchu Sambi Juje, Gobango the Shebatan, Langumbale, Shanchu Sambi Lal Cheba in San Diego. Teina, Dubale, Chule Cheba said. Tuan Chuje, ya. Cheba Chibi Chule Cheba Yimba, Shanchu Sambal Cheba Yimbesh, Shanchu Sambal Cheba, Chule Cheba Suna, or the Beji, Telejaguna.
Chula Cheba, Sanchu Sambal Cheba Kai.
What the Kagi do?
Less so. So then when we look at divisions of the Buddha, we have divisions such as the enjoyment body and the emanation body. And the emanation body, the enjoyment and emanation body are impermanent. So the emanation body turns the wheel of the Dharma, and by turning the wheel of the Dharma, the hearers and the solitary realizers are able to achieve the state of the Dharma jewel within their continuums. So they're able to achieve the true paths and true cessations within their continuums. So based on the turning of the wheel of Dharma that the impermanent body of the Buddha does, which is the emanation body, the hearers and solitary realizers are able to achieve their paths and cessations. The Buddhas arise from the Bodhisattva path, in the practice of that Bodhisattva path of true paths that then lead to the cessations, which then give rise to Buddhahood. So when we look at the Chandrakirti's Madhyamika Avatara, it says those hearers and those halfway to Buddhahood, or those Prachika Buddhas, arise from the Buddha jewel, and the Buddhas arise from the Bodhisattvas. So we find this quote in the Madhyamika Avatara, but then we find the quote...
the
Lapsar, the Lodzinsar, Lapsar. The Jula? Yeah, the Lapsar. Rinpoche said it's right at the beginning of the Umanjupa, but I just... I'll reread it. The Shravakas and those halfway to Buddhahood are born from the mighty sage. The Buddhas take their birth from the Bodhisattva heroes. So the hearers and solitary realizers are born from the Buddha, and the Buddhas are arisen from the Bodhisattva. But then we see here that they are arisen from the Dharma. The Buddhas are arisen from the Dharma, all these qualities and so forth. So we have to look at it in the same way we would look at the path causing the cessation. How it's just nominally designated as in terms of dependent upon, and not literally a cause of because the cessation is permanent. So these are all points. Bodhisattva's Buddha's path, no good, true, good, turning. These.
and then Lading there was a Mikitava no Ayins. Tende what the Ledger the Madin Kabdu.
So it's hard to answer some of these questions when we say based on the Buddha, the hearers, and solitary realizers, or hearers in those halfway to Buddhahood. I'm sorry. So the arisal of the Dharma jewel within the continuums of the hearers and the solitary realizers comes from the Buddha. But we have to just look at it as a nominal designation when we look at it from a cause and effect perspective. Again, because the Dharma jewel has the two aspects of, Rinpoche said before, path, impermanent, and cessation, which is permanent, so it's necessarily permanent. So it's similar to how cessation is said to be caused by the true paths. It's just a nominal designation that it is a producer of it, and not an actual producer in the meaning of the word cause.
Dalai Lama ta Chenri bakeba mo ndepon pe ne wo Chenri bazu karjo gundu Chenri bazu bagile no do ndepon le khoju chondu so do
Tanda
Chenri ta na ju chondu
right now Jiao Rinpoche Yurbe
ndepon to jin to
so at the Drepung, the Dalai Lama and many scientists and so great scholars are having an interaction right now, a discussion.
Chenrezig what the Devon Rune, Judan Debutan Chiris, the Judan D. Devon Givares, Tawani Tabares, Gudentan Ladeni Tabares, Chenrezig didn't allow.
So then we're saying to scientists that cause and effect are synonymous, mutually inclusive, but this is cause and this is result are mutually inclusive. Paths and cessations are permanent. When you put the two words together, paths and cessations are permanent, etc. So these are some of the things talked about. And I forgot one thing Rinpoche said from before also, is that it's similar to this relationship between what came first, is the chicken born from the egg or the egg born from the chicken.
And Chenrezig what the Chenni to know the Shes was Muna, and Chokuju Taba Marbe, Goden and Ladeni Taba Marbe long.
So if we Yandrasur Long going in the
then Chukun to the Saji and Debbie is a door. Chukun to the tea Jebutans, Chukun to Saji Debbie Loro, Saji Debbie, Chukun to Goden and Ladeni, then Debbie Imbatas. So
these are the types of things that are being discussed and debated amongst the scientists. If the Dharma jewel is permanent, but it says the Dharma jewel is a result of the Buddha jewel. But the Dharma jewel is referring to the two, cessation and paths, which are permanent. So how is a permanent aided by a producer, etc.? So they are now discussing all of these terms and looking at them in depth.
So this
is what Chenrezig? Science. Okay, I want to make sure I wasn't mistaken. So these are the debates that go on in so these types of debates are the debates that go on all the time in Drepung, Sera, and Ganden Monastery. So the science scholars were requested this. They were wanted this.
What the Gadul Chukajute, Swaji Gujun, the Vins and Anangatul, and the two.
So those who are studiers of philosophy would debate this and say, oh, the Dharma jewel arises from the Buddha jewel, how is this possible? So we would use this as our course for investigation. Or debate, you can say, but it's more of an investigation. This word debate gives like a feeling of competition that is there, but not. It's a little bit loaded in the West. It's more of an in-depth analysis between two people but the word debate is a little bit questionable because it infers this something that isn't within what's going on. Okay, so then here's a part where a doubt may arise.
That trilogy chaba niba trilogy chabanes trilogy chaban rimba dar long lebar bubatan nyumo batan donge pon la me batan ngoba toashibi trilogy nos ngoba toashibi trilogy nos trilogy chaba sanji gonju chu gonju gane gonju sombodele trilogy chaba karo sanji ki trilogy kane kui trilogy songi trilogy tuji trilogy marbe kuitele tele de la jume jebatan hunji trobas ni jad marbe
Lessa.
sanji tele de la and hunji trobares dal nagasha de chuno naga dazu hobala kale kaimdo de na sanji tele dujal manjubala ane kale man beme nondures de jume jebares
Lessa.
de na je gendu tele ka de jagure chukunju tele ka de jagures.
So the next part is the distinction based on their enlightened activities. When we look at the Buddha, for instance, this will first, let me back up. So the enlightened activities. So this is going to deal with the enlightened activities of the Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and those who aspire to virtue jewel. What is the distinction between these? So the first point we deals with the enlightened activities of the Buddha, and this is the Buddha's enlightened activities of the body, speech, and mind. And we find that those enlightened activities have two qualities. First, that they are spontaneous, and second, that they are everlasting. First, they are spontaneous, and because they, without any effort, are produced. Like the moon reflecting off a basis of water, if it's there to serve as an appropriate reflector, the moon will effortlessly reflect. Likewise, the Buddha's enlightened activities will always come to us and bless us if the basis of faith is there. And secondly, they are everlasting, are always present or ever present, because the Buddha does not abide in nirvana. So these enlightened activities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind are spontaneous and everlasting. So these are the first qualities that we dealing with the Buddha. And then we'll look at all of the others also.
Trilogy chabanes, that changing jubi chabatu what the rules tabukuja with the son of Mamatan. Trilogy chabanes, Rimbatar, long lebambo batans, Sanji conjug trilogy candidates, long lebambo bas, long lebambo bas, Chukuku Adaman.
Okay.
And then Kolotamo, Kolbaba, Kolotama, Dotang, Haga, Chugo, long lebambo, long lebas, Somba. Chukuku to what is Haji Chile Jack and Ramadu, long lebambo batans. That long lebambo nang also Kanju to Kalo, and then also you share a Niburo. Share a Nibu Sanji Sombaro, Sanji Chuku, and then share a Nibu Nasu Julio. This Haji Chile. And then also Sanji Kandu, Lenin also Natu Kayuro, what to Sanji Chile, Laugur Somde. Long lebambo batans. That Sanji Chukukuate is a matter of Chukukuate, Sanji Tileres.
Okay, so the distinction based on the enlightened activities. The Buddha has the enlightened activities of giving sermons, the giving proper the Buddha gives the proper instructions of Scripture. So the Buddha gives proper instruction of Scripture, literally. So this is the enlightened activity, it says, of the Buddha. So of giving a proper explanation of Scripture, properly explaining Scripture. So we look at when and how this was done. We find the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. So when we recite the Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge, the Heart Sutra, this is a second turning of the wheel of Dharma, and necessarily the scriptural turning of the wheel of Dharma. So when we recite it, we have within our continuum the Buddha's enlightened activities. So when we recite this Heart Sutra, because it is the second turning of the wheel of Dharma pronouncement of the Buddha, we have the Buddha's enlightened activities within our continuum. Because this is the Buddha's word, it's in our continuum, we're reciting it, and this is how we're affected or influenced by these activities of the Buddha. So the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma, and now we recite that, so the Buddha's pronouncements are within our continuum. I don't want to go further, I just want to... Yes? So the Buddha turns the wheel of Dharma spontaneously and everlasting, and the Buddha's speech teaches us the very Jason. So then the Buddha turns the wheel of Dharma and teaches virtue and so forth. So then we acquire the wisdom arisen from hearing. And then we acquire the wisdom arisen from the contemplation, and then the wisdom arisen from meditation, and progress the various paths, so the path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, and path of no more learning. All of these are the enlightened activities of the Buddha. So all of these virtues we engage in are the enlightened activities of the Buddha. Kapjeba gola kagi.
Kapjeba ke tuanda ngolo yongo.
Okay.
Tuandu kadu. Ngoni lo doje da ngoni go longo je. Ngoni lo tije ba tro go je. Tije ba tro ba ne. Chugun zeba tanje bas, chugun zeba tanje. Otaka do da kande. Lobe sanga zombe eshi chugu tele jagores. Eshi chugu tele. Eshi chugu tele jagores. Lobe baba drede go de chugu tele jagores. Chugu tele. Da eshi chugu tele tsinye jaundu ranju eshi chugu dajen shebale shu nankar jimen de eshi chugu tele tsinye yes. Tata gawa tuanji insonsa yo da kande gawal go do gawa. Chugu dajen shebale shu nankar jimen de chugu tele tsinye jago jegro da. Da chugun ra marda.
So we find that the excellent, the exalted wisdom body. So when we speak of the enjoyment body itself, it says is the final form possessing 5 definite characteristics. And when we speak of the exalted, the exalted wisdom. Just give me 1 minute. This is coming from the Abhisama Alamkara. Where we find the definitions of the exalted wisdom bodies, activities, and so forth, enlightened activities. And then the exalted wisdom bodies activities are synonymous with virtue, so or mutually inclusive with virtue. So the nature body is an ultimate sphere possessing two purities. So activities from the ultimate sphere possessing two purities would be the definition of the enlightened activities of the exalted wisdom body. So let me just go back to where we were. So in the, I think I did it. So the enlightened activities are influencing all of the virtuous activities at all times, and therefore, we find our virtue and the exalted wisdom body's enlightened activities to be mutually inclusive, or one meaning.
Trilogy Chaban Rimba the Long Leban Bobatans. Non leban boba son de tele de pluki tele jagre yeji jugu tele jagres de tele chabas rimbata non leban boba at the jugu tele yeji jugu tele.
So when we look at the enlightened activities, we have to ask, are we speaking of the enlightened activities of an emanation body or of the exalted wisdom body? So when we're speaking of that, what are we speaking of? And I think that the quote from the Abhisama Alamkara, it says, explaining the body of the truth body, nature body along with complete enjoyment body, likewise others, the emanation body, the truth body along with the activities, the four types of bodies are perfectly set out. So truth body along with the activities, meaning that the truth body, the exalted wisdom body's enlightened activities, and then if it is that, it's necessarily virtue. So we find the quote from the Abhisama Alamkara in the beginning, and then in the 8th chapter, Rinpoche says we get more into the details of the details of the exalted wisdom body, and so forth, and the activities, enlightened activities of the exalted wisdom body.
Ta tele chaban non leban boba so tele jagorwa an tamal sonji kui tele songi tele toji tele o de tele so de songa ja ayemi.
So when we look at the enlightened, when we look at the enlightened activities of the Buddha, we find that they're the enlightened activities of the body, speech, and mind. So when we're speaking of the enlightened activities, are we speaking of the enlightened activities of the body, speech, or mind? So then we have to question that.
What the Sundar Shadak in Devakru Jim with the Tamama Java Ina, Tugu Teleda Yimba, Tugu Tele Yimba, Longu Tele Yujirota, Long Lever, Rimbatar, Long Leba Boba, Sanji Conju, Long Leba Boba, Sanji Conju Teleres, Sanji Conju Longo da Tugo, Longu Tele, Tugu Tele, Eshijugu Tele, Songa Ayumi.
So we have to say then, here it says that Buddha has the enlightened activity of giving proper instructions of scripture. So is this an enlightened activity of the emanation body, truku, or is it an enlightened activity of the exalted wisdom body, the truth body? So we have to then ask these questions when we're speaking of which is it that's giving the sermons. So are we speaking of it in terms of what are we speaking of it in terms of?
That tele is no labor boba said the Sanji tele and ta chukon chul tele kandeja kurusna new moba ta donga pomba la meba dans chukon chuk tele josna new moba ta donga pomba la meba de chukon chuk tele ja marba chukon chuk tele josna new moba ta dengan pomba la me ba te chugun ju tele yin ngoba to a shibe tele ana gnu gun ju sen jo sna ngoba to a shibe the gnu gun ju tele is what the so do ji la na.
So the next it says the teaching has the enlightened activity of focusing on the eradication of the afflictions and suffering. So the object of observation of the enlightened activity of the teaching is abandoning afflictions and suffering. So this is the object of observation. And then it says the community has the enlightened activity of fostering enthusiasm and giving hope, fostering enthusiasm, making one see the potential is within that fostering enthusiasm. Rinpoche said just read this little bit.
다 추군주 대가주그래 당하서 내바지 나소나 네 매한도 다들 저주로 다다가 따지지네 아네 매사스 매대로다 매사소나 아노 그 나사 다너로 대나지 사지도 매바다 버렸어 아네 사지게 아네 매던데 추송 아네 추냐네 제발라 때네 세제가 주주 녀모바다 시지 제바도서 갈래갈래 본래야 돼 나사 단데 나버 인사 말베
that's
녀모바다 동네 본라 메바스 산지기 최드냐래 매던데 산지기 최냐래 제발라 때네 내던데 녀모바다 안 동네 본도 거스.
That's so then we begin to look at the three jewels in this way. We begin to look at the Buddha as a doctor, and the Dharma as medicine, and the Sangha as a aid or a nurse. And then we see that the Buddha, the illness of the truth of the suffering, we are able to overcome by receiving the instructions from the Buddha, which are like the medicine, which are referring to the Dharma, that we can take and thereby be free from our illness, and the Sangha members helpful guides along that process. So we look at it in these terms where we recognize our sickness and see the Buddha as a doctor, the Dharma as medicine, and the Sangha as an aid.
내는 시작해서 동해에서 말이야. 동해에 내던다 버리스. 동해 주도 좋아서나 녀모바. 동해 주도 동해니 때문에 녀모바 당서 동해 주지. 너는 군주 밥이 되어서 동해에서 내는 시작해서 내던다. 동해 때마다 내 주도던다와 군주 되봐. 녀모부 군주 되지 군주. what tell me batale chukunju tleres marba nyomo batan donga ponwala me batan what the chukunju tle is.
So then when we look at the excellent quality of the Dharma jewel, we find that it has the ability, it has as its object of observation the abandonment of the afflictions and suffering. So the suffering, the afflictions and so forth are abandoned by the Dharma jewel. So we see that it's like the elimination of the cause of the illness. So the Dharma jewel helps to eliminate the cause of the illness, and we can see that it's very similar to suffering and the origin in these terms, where we rely upon the eradication of an origin by relying on the Dharma. Yeah. So the eradication. So the subject the abandonment, the object of abandonment. Let's see if we the subject, which is the focus, the eradication of the afflictions and suffering, is the enlightened activity of the Dharma. That's Rinpoche is asking that question. So he's basically reading the sentence backwards. So the eradication of the object, focusing on the eradication and afflictions of suffering is the enlightened activity of the Dharma jewel. Is the question. Tapa mayin. So we say the teaching has the enlightened activity of focusing on the eradications of the suffering. So then we say the subject, the Buddha jewel, is permanent or impermanent. The subject, the Dharma jewel, is permanent or impermanent. And impermanent because it's eradicating afflictions and suffering. So the mitapa yimbatel, the nyomondan dunya pong. Because it is impermanent. So Rinpoche is saying the Dharma jewel is impermanent because it is getting rid of the afflictions and the suffering are the enlightened activities of it. This is where doubts arise. We have to investigate. So when we look at this abandonment of suffering and the afflictions, this is a cessation. This is a goden, a cessation. So this abandonment that's in the Tibetan, this eradication, in Tibetan the abandonment is the abandonment that's referring to the abandonment on the uninterrupted path in the Parchimulam. So there's the uninterrupted path and the path of release, seeing at each of the seeings of emptiness. So the uninterrupted path is the cessation that we're speaking, this kind of eradication, where we're saying closing of the door. So that's just as a note, that closing, act of closing, this word eradication is that word. And it isn't eradicated, it's eradicating. So it's referring to the Parchimulam, the uninterrupted path itself.
So in this
case, the Tibetan word that is being used is referring to the active, actively ending, active abandonment, actively abandoning, and the second word Rinpoche's spelling in Tibetan is the abandonment, abandoned. The sense of, so one is actively abandoning and the other is abandoned. So in this case we're speaking of actively abandoning. So this eradication is actively abandoning the afflictions and suffering. So we're speaking to the uninterrupted path. If we were speaking of the eradicated afflictions and suffering, then we would be speaking about the path of release.
다 그냥 그걸 ngapa troashi intelligence 도 다 그냥 그 다니 되게 좀 냐래제 아니 주주 근데보 심문 근데보 심문 근데보 다주 근데보 도소나 아니 간다 현다 제수야 제수 아지 다도 범세 아버지 ngapa troashi
So the community has the enlightened activity of fostering enthusiasm, because as those aspiring to virtue engage in the pathways. So for instance, the hearers, path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning, as they achieve those various results of stream enterer, once returner, never returner, and foe destroyer, as they achieve in the hearer's vehicle, as these achieve these results, then the other beings witnessing this become enthusiastic and rejoice in this, and they become inspired by it. So this is what is meant by those who aspire to virtue have the enlightened activity of fostering enthusiasm. It's that, and that last week when we were going over the 4 results, those are the 4: stream enterer, once returner, never returner, and foe destroyer. And those are the range of those who are practicing virtue. Those are the virtue results: stream enterer, once returner, never returner, foe destroyer. So then others rejoice in these attainments, and then it fosters enthusiasm. So then when we think of these various enlightened activities of the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, then we go for refuge based on knowing the distinctions of these enlightened activities. The Buddha has the enlightened activities of giving a proper explanation of the scripture. The Dharma has the enlightened activities of having the eradication of the afflictions and suffering as its object of observation, abandoning those things. And the Sangha has the enlightened activity of fostering enthusiasm. So then we think of these, and then we can go for refuge properly by way of knowing these distinctions of the enlightened activities. So that we'll end there.
What do you say?
It looks like we're out of time. So you listened well, and if you slowly think of these things, you'll slowly come to you. You'll become familiar with them.
What the Jews say the rebel
they rasa the chepa. Oh yeah, you're right. So that'll be enough. Thank you. We'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. Tu Rinpoche Shira Sobuldu. So the final pages of the book. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure land. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well, with whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times. I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, learned scriptural and realizational doctrines, spiritual friend who trained us in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche Gutsi Shapi Deno.